George Bush Sr. had a lot to say back in the 1990s about a new world order in the world, and his son went out and tried to create a new world order. In your new book, Rising Power, A Shrinking Planet, you say there actually is a new order in the world, but it's not the one either of them was thinking about. Can you kind of lay out the landscape of that new world order for me?
Sure. Well, the New World Order that the older Bush talked about was a condominium of the major powers working together to preserve order. That was the original notion of a New World Order, and it was roundly derided. The real New World Order, as I see it, is a world order in which energy is the pivot of power, and in which the energy surplus countries, led by Russia, Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, and other energy-rich countries, really control the sinews of power. And energy deficit countries like the United States and China must compete amongst themselves for access to a dwindling supply of these critical resources and bleed themselves economically in the pursuit of what's left of the world's energy.
In your book, you lay out several factors that are going to lead to, in essence, a petropower world. One is rising demand. Why don't we start with rising demand and those new powers that go with it?
Well, it's not so much rising demand. It's the intense competition generated by the emergence of economic dynamos in Asia, especially China and India, creating an unprecedented level of demand for energy in a very short space of time. I mean, there's always been rising demand, but China's rise and India's rise has added just an unusual, huge increase in demand in a short period of time, and shifting the global balance of demand from the global north to the developing parts of Asia. And this is what's so extraordinary about this current moment.
And every day we literally see a new record oil price, for a single barrel of crude oil. It's absolutely startling. I know that the price of a barrel of oil has doubled since 2005, beyond that now. One of the problems is that while demand is on the rise, oil itself is harder to get at, yes?
Yes, the rise in the price of oil is produced by a combination of two factors. It's this extraordinary increase in demand from China and the other countries, other developing countries, in conjunction with continuing high levels of demand from the older industrial countries, led by the United States, Europe, and Japan on one hand. On the other hand, a slowdown in the capacity of the global energy industry to increase supply. They're still increasing supply, but in very small increments.
You called this the tough oil era.
The tough oil era. We've used up all the easy sources of supply. The big giant reservoirs, they call them elephants, the giant reservoirs, they're all gone now. What's left are smaller reservoirs in hard-to-get-at places, far offshore, or in politically difficult countries like Chad, which is constantly at war, or in places like Russia and Kazakhstan where corruption prevails, or where the government is constantly interfering. So the energy industry is not able to increase supply consonant with the huge increase in demand, and it's the combination of these factors that's producing the high gasoline prices.
I was thinking the other day that in all your writing, you've been far ahead of the mainstream curve. You started with low-intensity warfare back when only the Pentagon was dealing with it. In the 90s, you were dealing with resource wars when most people were talking about resource non-scarcity. In 2002, you published Blood and Oil, which was obviously ahead of its moment on what's happened in Iraq and the Middle East with the Bush administration. And now you've moved into this new petro landscape for the planet. I was wondering if you could stay a little ahead of the curve for us and give us a sense of what you think's coming for the United States, the sole superpower, in the next 10 or 20 years, and then maybe for the rest of the world.
Well, I don't think the United States is the sole superpower anymore because we have the emergence of petro-superpowers like Russia and Saudi Arabia that are competing with the United States for global supremacy. So we're in a new world order, as I would call it, in which the United States has to compete for dominance and in which America's military power no longer seems so effective in achieving our objectives, and in which the dollar, once the supreme currency, seems increasingly weak, in which the American economy is suffering terribly because of our dependence on oil. I think we're going to see a reshuffling of power in the world and a much more diverse set of powers in which we will have to accommodate to a situation in which American preferences no longer prevail. And I think that's going to be very difficult for Americans to accept. And I think it's going to be something that we're going to find hard. But I think that's the new world we're facing today.
And in your new book, Rising Powers, Shrinking World, you consider the possibility that this could lead in some form, however accidentally, that we're in a very dangerous world in terms of potential future military conflict. Do you want to just elaborate on that a little bit?
Yes, and when I talk about this, the model I think of is the period before World War I, not World War II or an imaginary World War III, when nations deliberately chose to go to war. I don't think the United States or China or Russia would deliberately choose to go to war. They knew that the price of conflict would be horrendous, but they're engaging in struggle over resources in Africa, in the Caspian Sea Basin, in the Persian Gulf, in ways that the empires before World War I engaged in what they used to call the Great Game. We're engaged in a new Great Game in these areas, and it could lead to accidental or inadvertent conflict. It's exactly that kind of situation that triggered World War I, unintended conflict, and I worry that we could find ourselves very much in that kind of situation today.
Thank you very much.